Welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is produced by Umbrex, which connects you with the world's top independent management consultants. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm here today with Dan Goldman, who is the Global Vice President of Strategy at the North Face. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Will. Super excited to be here and have a chance to chat with you.
So, Dan, all of us know the North Face brand. We either own some of the apparel ourselves, or we've certainly seen folks walking around with it. But we may not all know just sort of how the company's structured and so forth, and how it goes to market. Could you just give us an overview of the North Face as a company?
Yeah, absolutely. We were founded in 1966 in San Francisco by a gentleman named Doug Tompkins and his wife. And 50 years later, North Face is the leading premium exploration brand in the world. We make apparel, footwear, equipment, basically anything you need to explore the world, whether it's on the mountain or in the city. Um, you know, we um, we sell through a mix of our own stores, e-commerce, and across a number of different wholesale channels around the world. We are truly a global brand, which is very exciting. Um, and one of the things we've always prided ourselves is the brand's ability to really disrupt the industry and push it forward in terms of innovation. Um, we were one of the first to make lightweight backpacks to really make the outdoors more accessible. We invented geodescent tent. Um, we obviously have a number of innovations on the apparel side, kind of dating all the way back, but some of the more recent ones that we've launched is one called Future Light, which really revolutionary waterproof, breathable technology, and it's really sustainable as well. So if you think about, for all those people out there that anytime you put a waterproof or like rain jacket on, your jacket may keep you dry from the rain, but our jacket also helps keep you from getting soaked from the sweat that gets trapped inside. So it really, really makes a better experience. So we've done a lot of innovation to continue to differentiate the brand um, uh, on the product side. I think with something other interesting facts about the company, obviously that people may not know, is we're actually owned by a larger publicly traded company called VF Corp. VF also owns brands like Vans, Timberlands, Dickies, Smartwell, Icebreaker. So we have a really nice family of brands that really come together in a really strong way.
So, and does the North Face actually kind of manufacture the goods that you make, or is it really responsible more for the design and the marketing and the retailing, and like how do you get the goods actually produced?
Yeah, I mean, we 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 um, we own everything in terms of kind of the design, the marketing, the product development process, and then we really partner very effectively with manufacturers in the marketplace that are experts at what they do, and we tend to build long-term relationships with those factories, and do our manufacturing, but also try, when appropriate, to reinvest in those factories and in the environments around them.
Cool. Let's talk a little bit about the coronavirus impact on your industry and on the company, and how the North Face has responded to protect its customers and employees.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing, living in the Bay Area for the last decade, uh, I've often been jealous of the startup culture and considered an entrepreneurial path many times, as many of my colleagues from McKinsey or Kurt Salmon left consulting world to go to fun startups. However, I have to say, at this point in time, I feel extraordinarily fortunate and appreciative that I'm part of a big brand called like North Face and owned by a publicly traded company like VF Corp, which has over 100 years of history, really strong balance sheet, strong credit lines. So we're really in a really good situation, and definitely compared to many of the other apparel or retail brands you've heard of out there in the marketplace that have really been challenged. And there's been no shortage in terms of the apparel industry um, of news around bankruptcies, whether it's J. Crew, Neiman Marcus, some other ones kind of rumored out there as well. So I think, luckily we're in a very fortunate position. There's no doubt if you look at the marketplace, what you see is, not surprisingly, consumer demand has obviously fallen significantly for apparel across all sectors. And, it's not surprising, obviously, with high employment, economic uncertainty, and, some consumer fear of, even when stores open back up, do they want to go back to public places? Do they want to go into malls? Do they want to go into department stores? So, I do think, that the industry is obviously challenged and will be for the foreseeable future. That said, I think there are pockets that are doing better than others. You do see kind of activewear, athleisure, sweats. It's interesting, even tops are doing better than bottoms because people, not surprisingly, spending a lot of time on Zoom and want to look professional, but may be wearing sweats on the bottom. So
Right.
I think it's understanding kind of where consumers are today, given the uncertainty, and trying to figure out how do you meet them where they are and solve problems. I think, at times like this, probably more so than any time I can remember in my life, if you think about, not to get too academic, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a lot of businesses today are really, or in the past have been very successful kind of serving kind of the top kind of tiers of needs. But what you saw during kind of the pandemic, especially over the first month or two, was really a return back to the bottom, kind of those basic needs about, just getting enough water, food, safety, being with family and making sure their friends and family are safe. And I think, that is a big shift in consumer behavior that, it will take a little bit of time to return to normal, and will have longer term effects even after, not, just like you could say the Great Depression shaped generations to come in terms of spending and habits. This may have a similar effect as, the unemployment rate continues to remain high for the foreseeable future. I think if you think about, you know, the where North Face sits, there's obviously reasons to be optimistic given kind of what we do, and people looking to the outdoors for a little bit of escape, a little bit of mental health break, a little bit of activity. And we're a strong brand and part of a strong family of brands that we should weather the storm really well. One of the interesting things, and please stop me if if you have questions, is as we saw COVID coming, and being a global company, we obviously saw the rise of the virus in China, and then kind of it slowly coming into Europe and the US. So it did leave us some time to react, and gave us time to really strategize around, and put together really a playbook about how we wanted to approach as the pandemic grew bigger. And the playbook really had six big components. The first one was really focus on our internal people and our culture. North Face, not surprisingly, has hundreds of employees, and their safety and well-being was definitely our first priority. So we shut down our stores in our office very early. And although we had kept our DC open to handle e-commerce, we put in obviously a lot of protocols to protect worker safety. We're also very fortunate, again, being part of the VF Corporation with very stable balance. We've been one of the few retailers to actually continue to pay our retail employees, even while stores were closed in the Americas. So again, that says a lot, I think, about the values of the company, but also kind of, how the company is navigating and managing through this environment when you obviously heard about a lot of retailers doing furloughs or layoffs. And then, even while people have been able to work remotely, everybody's impacted different. They may have friends or family that are sick. They may be homeschooling while they're trying to work. And what we've tried to do is make extra efforts to think about people's mental health, and focus on culture, community. We've been hosting regular town halls. We'll have some of our professional athletes come in and speak to people about resilience, about how to weather a storm. They've obviously done it out in the mountains, and the same lessons apply. And we're doing things like weekly optional meditations and blocking chunks of different days so people don't have meetings. So that really was one sector. The second was on community. We really felt we had a role to play in helping our community, and we did it through a number of ways. The first was kind of through kind of an effort called United to Move the World Forward. And it really tries to reflect the North Face brand purpose and our values, and the notion of, even while we're social distancing, I don't think ever, at least in my lifetime, has there been an event where nearly every human on Earth is experiencing the same thing at the same time like this. And so there is an opportunity while we're all physically separate for hopefully all of us to come through at the end of this more united in a way that we can really kind of help shape the future to a better place. And I think at North Face, we've always seen one of our roles as not necessarily always being the one to solve the problems, but at least being a voice in the room, whether it's climate change or back in the day, North Face was very active on kind of the AIDS pandemic. So we feel like we have a voice to play in really pushing the conversation forward and doing what we can. So we donated a number of supplies to medical workers and first responders. We donated money from what we call our Explore Fund to parts of the outdoor industry that's been most impacted by COVID. And we even did things like honoring first responders and medical workers by extending our pro discount, which is usually reserved only for outdoor industry experts, to doctors to thank them. So small things, but again, we wanted to make sure that we did say thank you. We did kind of be a voice out there, and that seems to register in at least the communities that we serve. I
Well,
can keep going, or if you have questions.
yeah, no. One question I have is, take us a little bit inside, and obviously respecting confidentiality, but could you tell us anything about just organizationally how the North Face, made the decisions and developed the response plan, and to what degree was there a kind of a central, top committee? To what degree are you devolving authority to country managers or more local managers? I'm curious to how a company like the North Face, a global company, has organized to respond to this crisis.
It's a great question, Will, and I think because of our scale, we've organized at many levels. To be honest, some decisions were made at the VF level, with the brand's input and participation, but because we are a family of brands, there's a responsibility to ensure some equity across brands. So decisions to close stores, that was made at a kind of a regional level when appropriate and a country level when appropriate. And we wanted to do it in unison with the family of brands like Vans and Timberland. Um, Decisions to pay store employees. Again, that's really important when you're all part of a company that if one brand's going to do it, all brands have to do it. Just in terms of doing it. So there was a lot of coordination, and again, a critical role that people in our corporate play in terms of connecting the dots and in making sure that things are done. Then there's a lot done kind of at the brand level as well. So how we organize, how we respond, how we pivot our marketing, how we think about e-commerce, how we think about digitizing our operations, how we think about our spending, our cash flow. That is all really done at a brand level. And we have a very strong leadership team of kind of across all of the different functions, as well as across our general managers of the regions. And we all really came together, and we obviously spent a lot of time together at the beginning of the crisis, kind of aligning on the playbook and making sure everybody felt good about it, understanding what needed to be global, what needed each region to do differently, because each region is at very different stages of the pandemic. Obviously, in China, many of our stores have reopened, and it's at a very different place. In Europe, it's country by country, it is different, and different countries are opening up on different scales, and they need to be able to react quickly. And I do think the notion of agility in a time like this is probably one of the most important things a business can do. There are times where scale trumps agility, but in this time, I really feel like agility is more important. So where we can empower the regions, where we can empower the countries, by all means, that's what we've done.
Tell us a little bit about the experience of reopening stores in China, and maybe what lessons you've learned for planning to reopen stores in the U.S. and other regions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Chinese consumers have been very resilient in many ways. In China, in many ways you can draw lessons, but in many ways you can't because um, kind of the social dynamic, the government dynamic is very different in China than in some of the other regions. Clearly we were able to learn around protocols around in communication to consumers, how you think about safety of employees, how you think about safety of consumers, um, and share those back across region. But there's other things that just may not resonate as much that you can't really take across borders. So I think what we've seen, is traffic patterns in stores in China, and even as restrictions have lifted, what traffic patterns come back to the stores, what it does in terms of shopping basket size and potential product mix shifts. Um, but every region really is different, and you have to understand the local consumers, and that's where we are trying to empower the regions to make the decisions that's right for them. But there's a lot in terms of a playbook, communication approach, wanting to feel on brand, that we are sharing cross region.
Mm. What, if anything, can you share about how you're thinking about reopening stores in the U.S. and what it would take to feel safe to do that, and what the protocols will look like when we see stores reopen in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, we're following the guidelines of the local regions. Every state's on a different timeline, and different counties within regions and states are on their own timeline. So, first and foremost, we're following their guidelines. Second, we're looking at what other retailers are doing, to be honest. And I don't think we want to be the first one to open stores. We want to do it when it's safe. We want to do it when we feel like our employees feel comfortable going back to work, and when we know that consumers will feel comfortable going into stores. I think what you'll see is, a subset of stores opening. There may be some stores, all stores will have safety protocols from how many consumers can come into the store at one time, you know, likely, what restrictions we have. We'll double down on all cleaning and sanitation, all the normal things that you'd expect, that would make you feel comfortable. So, we'll be very diligent about it and very cautious about it, but I can't go into too much of the specifics in terms of the execution strategy at this time.
Sure. One thing I've heard in discussions with some other executives at other firms is how the coronavirus pandemic has driven some innovations in internal business processes. As one example, at Mirion Technologies, which makes radiation equipment, they used to have all customer acceptance testing was in person, where the customer would fly in from around the world to Connecticut and visually inspect and the material. Now they're doing those by video conference. In a discussion with Marvin Riley, the CEO at Inpro Industries, he talked about how they're doing sales differently in terms of they used to have salespeople fly around the world to go visit customers, and now they're doing video conferences, which are actually in some ways more effective because they can get a broader set of team members, manufacturing engineer, production engineer, designer, all on the same call with their customers, and that's something they plan to continue. Any innovations that you've been working on at the North Face that maybe have been accelerated by the pandemic that you actually think might continue on, or that you want to share?
Yeah, no, I think some of the things you highlighted, were definitely in a similar mode. I think the biggest innovation is really digitizing many of our internal operations. And if you think about the apparel go-to-market process, it's pretty complicated, and it's very high touch in terms of, you think about designers and product developers. There's a need to interact with product, interact with fabric. We tend to spend a lot of time in groups throughout the process, driving alignment on what is going to go into our next season's line. What do those products look like? Which ones do we want to prioritize? And if you think about that process, where historically you may have 100+ people in a room, you just can't operate like that in this time. And even as we potentially go back to the office, we'll still have restrictions in terms of how many people can be in any room for quite some time. So it does become a big shift in terms of how you work. And we've embraced Zoom as well as any other company, but you can't just do what you did on Zoom. You got to change. So if you think about, as opposed to physical product samples, digital product samples. If you think about, again, being global as opposed to having people from our Asia and Europe team fly here, how do we actually create mechanisms to communicate with them across time zones where, when it's very hard to get all three time zones in a meeting at once, let alone a large group. So it really is about digitizing the operations. And I do think a lot of that will stick because one, it makes us move faster. And again, going back to the agility being really key. Um, but two, it also makes us work smarter and in the long run saves money that we can then reinvest in true innovation or into marketing, demand creation. So I do think a lot of that will stick. I think the other area you see continued, uh, maybe not kind of changing of plans, but an acceleration of focus is obviously on e-commerce, given that's the only channel that has been open predominantly. And so how do you shift more of your marketing investment, more of your focus, more of your capacity to serve that channel?
Yeah. You mentioned, spoke before about how you've been pivoting your marketing. Could you talk about that a little bit? Is it in terms of, it's a tricky balance with, this pandemic underway. How have you shifted your marketing in terms of either messages or channels, and how you reach out and speak to consumers?
Yeah. I mean, some we've had to do out of, again, to your point, how do you be relevant and speak to consumers in this time? And some we had to do out of need because, the campaigns we were planning to shoot, you obviously can't go on site and shoot. So you have to be crafty. I mean, we really rallied around this idea of united to move the world forward and pulling people together, understanding how you can weather a storm right now, and then as consumers then shift to their mindset as this country opens up again, how we enable that exploration. So we did a number of things. I talked a lot about the community efforts that we did. But in terms of we did also a lot of work to bring relevant and engaging content to our consumers. So um, we did a lot of kind of Instagram lives. We opened up our archives in terms of a lot of the expeditions that our athletes go on to, and shared that content and reshared that with our consumers. One example, if you haven't checked it out, we have a film on Lhotse expedition led by Hillary Nelson and Jim Morrison. Hillary is actually our athlete team captain. We were one of the first major brands to have a female athlete to be the captain of the team, which is super exciting. But they are two of our biggest athletes, and they completed the first ever ski descent of Lhotse Mountain, which is the fourth highest ski mountain in the world. I think it's close to 28,000 feet. And it's just a really compelling movie and content. And while these two athletes are accomplishing amazing things, you also see the human side of them. Hillary's a mom, and yeah, she's as they're climbing the mountain to then ski down. You just see she's a real person and what she can accomplish. And Jim is incredible too. So I think that's been one avenue. We've also had our athletes and some of our other influencers that we work with share how they're passing time during the shelter in place. Obviously, they're not used to being cooped up, but they're sharing how their home workouts are going or other creative ways that they're spending time. So it's small stuff like that that creates real engagement when consumers are sitting home, kind of anxious, looking for content, honestly. And we're not trying to sell them anything right now. We're trying to engage with them in a way that you know makes them feel better, makes them feel optimistic about getting back out in the world, and it is really compelling. So we're doing a lot of that stuff, and as the country opens up, we're going to be there just like we've been there for the last 50 plus years to help them explore, get up back outside, go see the world. I think the power of nature, it's really healing in a lot of ways, both from the physical activity side, but the mental aspect. And we're going to play a big role in helping people get out there and re-explore.
It's It's really pretty remarkable and shows the values of VF Corporation and the brands that you've kept paying all the retail employees. That's pretty awesome. Question about that is, if the retail employees are at home, have you asked them to do anything to, either develop their skills or take courses, or, have they been, have, kind of to use the time productively?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done a number of different trainings with them, and we kind of have digital training platforms, and also help them or ask them to help out in other ways. But they're a really important part of our family. They're obviously on the front lines, and they represent our brand. Um, to consumers, they're the face of their brand. They're the ones that know the regular consumers that come in, and they're super important. So we felt like it would be hard, to regain that level of, really kind of guides. They're not just store employees; they're really guides for a consumer. So, we definitely wanted to protect them as best as we could, but also make sure they continue to get better and learn. And we have great employees.
I'd love to transition and hear a bit about your story and your transition from consulting to your role at the North Face. So you were at McKinsey. What made you decide to leave McKinsey and join the North Face?
That's a great question. You know, Taking a step back, I would say my passion area throughout my career has been kind of the intersection of consumer psychology and growth. And, kind of where that amounts to is helping brands increase their emotional connection with their consumers to drive that long-term sustained growth. And so, like the last 20 years, I've had a mix of consulting and industry experience where I've been able to drive that passion. And I wasn't really looking to leave McKinsey, but when TNF reached out, it was a brand that I was always a huge fan of. I remember growing up in the Northeast as a kid. I had a twin sister, and I literally remember the day that both of us got our first North Face jackets, and we ran in, and I said, "I'm going to get the blue one." She got the red one. And we literally wore those jackets for the next 5 or 6 years. Um, but as a consumer, over the last couple of decades, I saw North Face turn from that lifestyle brand that was really special into a brand that made really good functional jackets, but may have lost some of that brand love. And so I felt like there weren't many times in your career you could go to an iconic brand like TNF, but also an iconic brand that needed a little bit of love. And so it's been a ton of fun to come over and spend a little over the last 2 years at North Face, really helping it continue to grow, continue to evolve, and sharpen.
Could you talk a little bit about your role? So, what exactly does a head of strategy do at a company like the North Face?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about strategy roles is every company is a little bit different in terms of how their strategy team is set up and what their objectives are. In my role, I oversee strategy, consumer insights, new growth platforms, which is essentially business model innovation, and then business development. So on the strategy side, we develop the brand strategy, everything from helping roll out our brand purpose and our values, our positioning, our mission, our vision, all that good stuff. We develop the 3-year strategic plan and then translate that to a 1-year action plan that gets rolled out to the organization. And then we spend a lot of times activating the growth strategies and partnerships with our regional general managers and our functional leaders. On the consumer insights side, it's all about ensuring the voice of the consumer is injected into everything we do. And then new growth platforms is really around, again, new business model innovation. So my team owns what's called the North Face Renewed. North Face Renewed is a re-commerce platform that we launched a little over a year and a half ago. We take product that's been damaged or kind of returned. We clean it like new, fix it, and then resell it. Keep the product out of the landfills, offer a great value to consumers, and has a really big sustainability impact. So that's something that an example of a new business platform that my team owns and scales. And then on the business development side, it's obviously about looking for unique growth opportunities, partnerships, that sort of thing.
When you're looking to hire folks to add to your strategy team, what do you look for? What makes someone distinctive and stand out and get your attention?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is about a year ago, we relocated our corporate headquarters from San Francisco to Denver. So I essentially had to rehire a whole new team. And again, not all strategy teams are the same across organizations. And our strategy team is on the relatively small side, so we need more generalist versus kind of bigger brands or bigger organizations that may have room for more specialists. So based on my focus, I prioritize mostly folks that have more top of the funnel growth strategy experience over folks who have spent more of their time in operations improvement or implementation. Not to say one set of experiences is better than another, but it's just the skills that we need right now, that given the focus areas. Specifically, I'd say, culture fit is critical. I think everybody says that, and as you think about consulting in the airport test, I think it's even more important when you get to a corporation. And North Face does have a unique culture. It's one of the nicest cultures I've ever been a part of, but it's also, you need folks that can kind of connect and kind of have that authenticity. I think a fast learner is also critical. I think people coming from consulting may overestimate how much they really understand about apparel, about retail, about brands. And we don't expect them to know everything. But being a fast learner, they can get up to speed. They have that self motivation to do it. A couple other things I would say is, I really look for people with high motors and operating speeds. And that's usually you get those from consultants versus people that have been in the industry. But I want my team to be seen as driving the ball forward and really pushing the organization. And you just have to move at a slightly faster speed than the rest of your organization to do that. Then there's the obvious things, kind of the strategic mindset, and make people do it, kind of a case presentation, analytic, structured thinking, kind of all that good stuff.
How do you judge the culture fit?
Yeah, I mean, it's really about getting to spend a little bit of time with them. There again, I think the most important thing is authenticity. I think usually that comes out pretty obviously through just conversations. And is the person being real? Is there a human side to them? Are they willing to show that they're not perfect? And in interviews, we often try to be perfect, but I think there is a human element. Do you connect? And you find those out more in the small moments than of the interview. The greeting, the small talk over lunch. When you're just having those side conversations. So it's not necessarily kind of a one or two criterias, but that's why you also have to meet with a cross section of people across different functions, not just members of our strategy team too.
From your own experience, as well as the folks that you've hired, what are some of the biggest surprises when people leave a consulting firm and take an industry role?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is, and I had been earlier in my career, I'd spent time at Procter and Gamble's, but it's been nearly a decade. I think the first thing that that hit me is it's really fun to be back on the brand side. And not that consulting is not fun, but it's a different experience, because rather than working with different teams, you can switch teams pretty often. In this environment, you really get to see and work with the same people every day. And I think feeling like you're on a permanent team has a different effect. And that's why, again, the culture is so important. And then I think there's also a real reward aspect of coming in every morning and seeing what the brand sales were. And, having that as a proof point on whether your strategy is working or not. Often in consulting, you build a strategy, then you leave, and maybe you'll hear from the consultant good things or bad things, but you don't really feel that sense of ownership. So I think those are kind of two things I've experienced. I think kind of reflecting on kind of other aspects from other people I've talked to and hired. I think the biggest surprise people see is how long it takes to make things happen. Big ships turn slowly. You need to, kind of do it over time. You need to kind of get the buy-in across the organization, and that requires simplifying communication, repeating communication. Again, it's not just about the PowerPoint, but it's about if you have 50% of the work is what's done when the PowerPoint's finished.
It's not
Um,
just about putting some pages together and
exactly.
getting approval.
Yeah. I think the other couple of things are kind of in organizations like this, there's really a strong mix of right and left brain thinkers. When you're in consulting, you're primarily working with people that think more or less like you. And even your primary clients are probably more on the strategic, analytical, or process side. When you're at an apparel company, there are a lot of great people that are creatives, designers, um, and they think totally differently. And you just need to think about how do you adjust your approach to work with them and bring them along, have them be, how do you turn them into some of your biggest advocates to bring the strategies to life? Because ultimately, if your strategy doesn't show up in the product, if it doesn't show up in the marketing, consumers are never going to see it. So they're some of the most important people in the organization to really win over. And then last, I think the biggest thing is, again, I think people really don't realize how much they don't know. And again, this goes back to why being a fast learner is so critical. I think when you're doing consulting, you obviously get a great set of experiences and you get to go very wide. And oftentimes, even if you're spending a long time at a client, you really only necessarily see part of the business. And a lot goes on beneath the surface that you kind of take for granted. And I do think it takes people longer to get up the learning curve than they'd expect. So, but for the most part, people really enjoy it. It is a change, but again, it's super fun. It's very rewarding, and especially being a part of a brand in a business like North Face, which has a long history and a bright future.
Well, Dan, thank you for sharing some stories about how the North Face has been facing the coronavirus pandemic and about your own personal history. This is really fascinating for me to hear. Really appreciate you joining today on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Well, really appreciate it. Look forward to chatting soon.